Hello and welcome back to Historical Geology, and today I want to look at Fossil Lab 3 on the echinoderms, graptolites, and some fossil plants. And this lab is not too involved. I mean, there's a lot of reading, and I do want you to read this. And again, the text of this lab will enable you to answer the questions that come along in here. So make sure you read through these and the different parts of the in this case, the echinoderms. And as we look at the different classes of echinoderms, I do want you to understand the classes and understand what Aristotle's lantern are and all these different features. And then here are some images of fossil echinoids. Remember, echinoids include the sand dollars and the sea urchins here, right? And so here we got some echinoids. And then as we go along here, we'll look at crinoids. So one of the more important Paleozoic fossils in the phylum Echinodermata are the crinoids, the stalked echinoderms. And they're really like a sea star that's sessile, that's anchored to the seafloor on this stalk. And we have the inverted animal here, and then its mouth would be in the middle of all these kind of frilly, they're not really tentacles, but they're plankton-catching, filter, suspension-feeding organisms. And the main part of the body is the silax here, right? And that's where the main body part in the mouth would be right in the middle of that. Usually in the fossil record, because these frilly suspension-feeding arms are fragile, they're not as easily fossilized. And we often find either the silax or just these discs. So they look like little discs or parts of the disc, but we usually find the stem parts of the organism. So usually that's kind of what we find in the fossil records. When we see those, we know we're looking at crinoids. The other big thing is that the age of crinoids, usually that's a Mississippian. They really started off, if we go back up here, for the crinoids. You can see they really start in the Cambrian, Ordovician. They become more abundant in Silurian, Devonian. They really take off here in the Mississippian. But you can see that they're really going from the Silurian through the end of the Permian when they're dominant. So kind of the mid to late Paleozoic. All right, and then the other, so here's some crinoids. So this is what I'm talking about. You usually find these stem columns or discs in the fossil record, and it's rare. It's not as common to find the actual whole crinoid, although some places in the Midwest, like near St. Louis, we do get these crinoidal limestones. So these are beautiful crinoidal limestone there. All right, and so as we go along here, we get the blastoids. The blastoids are also very similar to the crinoids, except they have a little bit of different structure. Yeah, so it looks like they're going to have this more apparent pentaradiate. So in other words, that five-fold radial symmetry. It's more apparent in these blastoids. Usually in the blastoids, we do find the stems. So here's some blastoids here. But we also find the silax, mostly the silax of these organisms here. You can clearly see the five-fold radial symmetry of these more clearly. And I do have one of these specimens that I'll show you in a little bit here for the unknown samples. All right, so here the activity, again, you're answering the different parts, or you're labeling the different parts of the organism. And make sure you label it on here and point out the different parts of the organism here. And then this question is pretty straightforward. Now when we get to the graptolites, remember the graptolites, well here there some are planktonic, some are anchored to some stable substrate, but for the most part they're suspension feeders or colonial, usually macroscopic. Here they're under the phylum Chordata, so they are early chordates. They have, in their larval stages, they have this dorsal stiffening, like a notochord, so that makes them into this phylum Chordata, which most humans and primates and fish all belong to this phylum as well. Graptolites being dendroid, and these are the ones that make the fan-shaped rhabdosomes, which are the colonies. And again, they're going to be attached. They're the ones that are going to be sessile, and they're going to use this thread-like nema to attach themselves to some substrate, or even something that's floating around that they can attach themselves to. And the other group are the graptoloids, and they're the ones that are planktonic, and they have the distinctive pattern. So remember, the theca is where the individual is living. It's living inside that little theca, and in one little, so these would be the little thecapods in here where they're living in there, and this thing's floating around, and that would be the planktonic version. And here's one that has that nema that would be anchored to some object. Actually, one more thing I want to add here. So I don't know if I added it on here, but usually when you find these in the fossil record, they look like little they're small, right? So they're about this size. This is 1 time, so they're to scale here on the diagram, and this is magnified 4 times over here. This is magnified twice. But the thing is, when you see them in rocks, they're usually in shales, black shales, and they have the fossilization is carbonization. So it's carbonization. All right, so you can answer, there's only a few questions about that. And now the last group here are the plants, and there's, so make sure you read through the plants and the descriptions I have on them. Yeah, here. And so really we're looking at, you should know, after watching the video and taking the Canvas quiz on the scale trees, lepidodendron. So here's lepidodendron, 2 different types of scale trees. Those are the lycopods. Here's some ferns, sphenopsids, and then which are the calamites and annularia. So these are sphenopsids. The key thing about these is that they're related to horsetails and sedges. So they're a little bit different than grasses. But during the Carboniferous, they really grew into these large plants here, right? Much larger than the sedges that we think about today. And remember the lepidodendron trees, these were huge. They reached 15 stories tall, ginormous trees during this Carboniferous time. And they're really the ones responsible for all the coal deposits we see in the world here during that time. All right, and the rest of this is pretty straightforward. Just read through these, and then you'll be answering some of the questions that go along here. So what I want to get to is showing you some specimens. We'll start off with the first one here. So for activity 1.6, so this first specimen you can make out right away that looks like a column where there are multiple discs attached here. So this is sample 1, and so your job is to tell me what this organism is, and then you can see there is a central. This one actually you can see the little central stem there. And also the thing to note on this sample here, you see one of these little branches that are coming out, and that's kind of what when we go back to so obviously this is going to be some crinoid. So you can see that the crinoids have these little branches, the cirri, right? So that's a little area where the cirri was probably branching out of this guy right in here, right? So anyways, that's sample 1. Sample 91. So sample 91, what I want you to see on this one that has these kind of vertical grooves. So this is actually some fossil plant, and we'll use my flashlight to emphasize the shadows there. As you can see, so this is a bark of some plant, right? So this plant, when it was living, it fell over, got buried, and this is the impression of that textured surface of that plant. So now go and look at your fossil plants and see which one this best represents, whether it's sphenopsids or lycopods. So it's one of those 2. And then that's sample 91. Sample 43 is another fossil plant, and this one you can see it has those diamond-shaped scales, right? So again, this is another fossil plant. So your job is to determine what type of, whether it's a sphenopsid, a fern, or a lycopod, right? So sample 43, that's a really good sample there. And then another fossil plant, just finish up the plant, sample number 96 is, looks like a fern, some sort of fern. So see if you can figure out what number 96 is. Here we see that fossil carbonization that I was talking about, and these are so some sort of graptolite. And let's see if I can get and what I want you to focus on is this little graptolite here, and these little, you can sort of make out these little cups right there. And so let's see if we can put a shadow on that a little bit better. And those would be the little theca. So if you can see that there is a little cup right there, then another cup there. Yeah, so you can see the little kind of barbed nature of that. That would be the theca. This one's not as obvious over here. Let's see if I can find another one that has. Yeah, so you can see the little theca right in there as well. So that one's also showing them. But again, it's showing that carbonization again in these black shales. So try to figure out what type of graptolite this one is, right? So that's number. In fact, we didn't have a number on this one. Let's make this number 2. Make it number 2. And then as you go to sample number 37, this is a kind of interesting sample. And I had to draw it in your lab because it wasn't in the original diagrams on slide. But you can see it has this. It had a little mouth here, and a little Aristotle's lantern would be in here. But this has a unique little kind of a frill on its edges. It's relatively flat, so it's some sort of echinoid. So again, your job is to tell me whether it's some fossil sea urchin or a fossil sand dollar, right? So again, this is sample number 37. And then another echinoid here, sample number 92. This one's interesting in that you can definitely see that pentaradial, that five-fold radial symmetry right here. See that? And you can actually name the different parts there. And then if we look on this side, let's see if we can find the. Yeah, note that unfortunately in our fossil diagrams for these, they don't show the underbelly of these. So usually the older echinoids, in fact this one's Cretaceous, have their mouth not in the center. And so you can see on our sample here, the mouth is up toward one end here, right? So modern sea urchins, echinoids, have their mouth, or Aristotle's lantern, in the central location. But the more Mesozoic ones, in this case probably a Cretaceous, has it at a different place here. So here's another fossil for you to identify, number 92. Here is an interesting sample, number 36. And 36, you can clearly make out the five-fold radial symmetry. And this is looks like a cast of a part of an echinoid, right? So, and it was probably a pretty large echinoid here, because this guy, I didn't use a scale here, but this guy is in the order of about maybe a little over two centimeters. So this guy was probably sitting inside of a much larger echinoid, so the mouth part in there, right? But look how big that is there. So your job is to figure out what the name of this thing is. So we know it's some sort of sea urchin, so sample number 36, but what is this part of the sea urchin, the mouth part of the sea urchin? And I think I even have a picture in the lab where you can look at those. So that's sample 36. And then the last sample is this little sample here, and you can make out it really has that obvious five-fold radial symmetry. And then if we put it on the side here, you can see it a little bit better there. And oh yeah, you can really see the texture there. So try to identify what this sample is. So again, this is sample number 97. All right, well that's it for the samples.